On a quiet Friday morning in early March of 1989, 5-year-old Justin Turner began his day like any other. A bowl of Cinnamon Crunch cereal, a short walk to the neighbor's driveway to catch the school bus, and a promise from his stepmother that she'd see him that afternoon when he returned home. But Justin never made it to that bus stop. He never made it to school. And by the time the sun set over the small town of Cross in Berkeley County, South Carolina, an ordinary morning had turned into every parent's worst nightmare. This is the haunting case of Justin Lee Turner, a bright, cheerful child whose disappearance and death would leave a community shaken for decades. You're watching Beyond the Case. If you're new here, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. It really helps us share stories that deserve to be remembered. Berkeley County, in the late 1980s, was a picture of Southern simplicity. Rural roads, framed by pine trees, families who knew one another by name, a place where children still walked to neighbors' homes and waved to passing cars. Among those families were the Turners. Victor Turner, a hard-working pipe welder, Pamela Turner, his wife, and Justin's stepmother, and little Justin, a lively 5-year-old with blonde hair and a soft smile that everyone remembered. Neighbors described Justin as friendly, gentle, and unusually polite for his age. He loved cartoons, toy trucks, and his mother's phone calls. To most, the Turner home seemed like any other, modest, quiet, a family just getting by. But beneath that calm surface, tension ran deep. Justin's biological parents, Victor and Elaine Pace, had divorced several years earlier. The separation had been bitter, with long court disputes over custody. Victor ultimately won primary custody, leaving Elaine to see her son only on weekends and through frequent phone calls. Still, she remained devoted, checking on him every day, saving his drawings, and promising that someday things would be different. On the morning of Friday, March 3rd, 1989, Justin's life appeared normal. He had his breakfast, he brushed his teeth, and he prepared to make the short walk from his home to the nearby driveway where the school bus would pick him up, the same route he'd walked countless times before. Pamela, according to her later statement, was inside the house taking a shower. Victor had already left for work. Justin's backpack was packed, his shoes tied neatly, and he was supposed to arrive at the neighbor's home by about 7:30 that morning, but he never arrived. When the bus reached the Turner neighborhood, the driver noticed that Justin wasn't waiting by the driveway as usual. The driver assumed he might be running late. A few minutes later, the bus pulled away, leaving behind a gravel road now silent and still. Back at home, Pamela didn't seem alarmed, at least not yet. She assumed Justin had caught the bus and gone to school like every other day. It wasn't until that afternoon, when the bus returned and Justin wasn't among the children stepping off, that reality began to shift. Pamela was waiting near the driveway, expecting to see Justin's small frame appear through the crowd. But when he didn't, she approached the driver and asked, "Was Justin on the bus this morning?" The driver shook their head. No, they hadn't seen him at all. Within minutes, panic began to ripple through the neighborhood. Pamela rushed to nearby homes, knocking on doors, asking if anyone had seen Justin walking that morning. Some children from his kindergarten class mentioned that he hadn't been at school either. At first, many assumed he must have fallen ill and stayed home, but that illusion shattered the moment Pamela confirmed that Justin had, in fact, vanished. By late afternoon, local deputies were notified. Berkeley County Sheriff's Office dispatched officers to the Turner property and the surrounding woods. Neighbors joined the search, walking through fields, calling Justin's name, hoping for any response. What began as a missing child call soon escalated into a full-scale search and rescue operation. Deputies James Gaither and Philip Mason were among the first responders to arrive. They began by canvassing the Turner home and surrounding property. Inside, nothing seemed out of place. Justin's clothes were neatly folded in his room. His toys lay scattered across the floor. There was no sign of struggle, no broken window, no forced entry. But something felt off. There was a camper parked nearby, a small travel trailer that Victor often used for storage. Deputies examined it briefly and reported finding nothing unusual. Still, They marked it as an area to revisit. By nightfall, dozens of volunteers had joined the effort. Flashlights moved through the darkness like fireflies as searchers combed through thick brush and ditches. Helicopters equipped with spotlights swept over the tree line. Dogs sniffed the ground, following faint traces of scent that seemed to lead nowhere. Meanwhile, Justin's biological mother, Elaine Pace, received the devastating phone call in another county. Her ex-husband's new wife was saying that Justin was missing. Elaine immediately left work, her heart pounding as she drove back toward Berkeley County. She prayed it was some misunderstanding, that her son had simply wandered off and would soon be found. But deep down, she felt an unease that words could not describe. Elaine's relatives later recalled how she clung to hope during those first few hours. She called the sheriff's office repeatedly, asking if any updates had come in. At first, investigators considered the possibility of a parental abduction, that perhaps Elaine herself had taken Justin out of desperation to regain custody. But that theory quickly fell apart. Elaine had been at work all morning, confirmed by co-workers. Her husband, Russell Pace, had also been accounted for. There was simply no evidence connecting them to the disappearance. Elaine's voice trembled during interviews as she pleaded with authorities. "I do not have my son. Please find my son." Her anguish was palpable. Even the deputies who spoke with her described her grief as genuine, raw, and inconsolable. By Saturday, March 4th, the missing child case had gripped the entire community. Flyers with Justin's school photo, bright eyes, short blonde hair, were pinned on grocery store windows and telephone poles. Local churches organized prayer groups. Strangers offered to help search through miles of forest and marshland surrounding the Turner home. Sheriff's deputies used boats to check nearby ponds, worried that the child may have fallen in. Others used ATVs to comb through thick underbrush. But after hours of searching, not a single clue was found. No footprints, no torn clothing, nothing. Then, on Sunday, March 5th, 2 days after Justin was last seen, everything changed. That morning, over 100 volunteers gathered once again at the Turner property. They were exhausted but determined. Among them was Victor Turner, Justin's father, who had returned from work to join the search. He looked distraught, pacing back and forth near the house as teams spread out across the land. At around mid-morning, Victor approached the camper, the same one deputies had searched days earlier. A few moments later, a shout pierced the silence. "Something's in here," he yelled. "Everybody stand back." What Victor found inside would change everything. Lying in a small storage compartment of the camper was the lifeless body of his son, 5-year-old Justin Lee Turner. He had been strangled, and though there were signs of a horrific assault, investigators found no evidence that Justin had been previously mistreated or abused. The search ended that morning, but the nightmare had only just begun. News of the discovery spread rapidly through Berkeley County. Neighbors wept openly in the streets. Reporters arrived from nearby cities, setting up cameras outside the Turner property. The once quiet rural road was now crowded with law enforcement vehicles and flashing lights. For the investigators who had spent days searching that same camper, disbelief set in. They had looked there before multiple times and found nothing. So how was Justin's body suddenly there? Deputy Philip Mason, one of the officers who had first searched the trailer, later underwent a polygraph test. He failed. Still, no evidence directly connected him to wrongdoing. The results only deepened the mystery. Was the child's body placed there after the initial search? If so, by whom? And why would anyone move a murdered child back onto his family's property? The autopsy would later reveal that Justin had food in his stomach, likely from his breakfast that morning, placing his time of death between 10 in the morning and 3 in the afternoon, on the day he disappeared. This suggested that he had not lived long after leaving home. Investigators faced a puzzling timeline. There were no eyewitnesses who saw Justin walking that morning. Pamela, the stepmother, claimed she had been in the shower and hadn't seen him leave. Victor insisted he'd already been at work. The lack of evidence made every hour feel heavier, every question harder to answer. To the outside world, the case was tragic. To those inside the Turner household, it was suffocating. As night fell once more over Berkeley County, one thing was certain: a 5-year-old boy was gone, and the truth of what happened to him remained buried beneath layers of confusion and fear. For investigators, the case was far from over. For Elaine Pace, the mother who had prayed for her son's safe return, the nightmare had only begun. When the lifeless body of 5-year-old Justin Turner was discovered on the morning of Sunday, March 5, 1989, Berkeley County went silent. The discovery shattered the fragile hope that had carried the community for 2 long days. What had started as a desperate search for a missing child was now a homicide investigation, one that would grow darker and more complex with every passing hour. This is Beyond the Case. If you're joining us for the first time, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to support the stories that deserve to be remembered. The news spread with the speed of wildfire. By noon, word had reached every corner of Berkeley County. Justin Turner, the 5-year-old boy who vanished on his way to the bus stop, had been found dead inside his own family's camper. Parents clutched their children a little tighter that day. Neighbors locked their doors earlier than usual. A thick, uneasy silence blanketed the rural roads of Cross. For law enforcement, the discovery brought more questions than answers. How had Justin's body ended up inside the trailer, a space that deputies had already searched multiple times? Who had placed him there? And most importantly, when? When investigators arrived back at the Turner property that Sunday, the scene was already crowded. Dozens of people, family members, volunteers, and curious onlookers had gathered near the camper. The area that should have been tightly controlled as a potential crime scene was instead contaminated by footsteps and fingerprints. Detectives struggled to secure the location for evidence collection. They began marking and photographing everything from the camper's door latch to the dirt under its steps. But the damage was done. Evidence that could have been vital was now compromised. Inside the trailer, the air was heavy. Justin's small body had been placed inside a storage compartment near the floor. Investigators noted that the compartment door was difficult to open, suggesting that whoever hid him there had done so intentionally. Even more disturbing was the condition of Justin's body. He was unusually cold to the touch despite the mild South Carolina weather. This led to early speculation that his body may have been refrigerated before being moved to the camper. To some, that theory seemed far-fetched. But in the absence of answers, every possibility was on the table. Crime scene technicians collected everything they could: fibers from Justin's clothing, animal hairs clutched in one of his small hands, and samples from inside the camper, including bedding, tools, and flooring. A freezer on the property was also seized for testing. Investigators needed to know whether it might have been used to preserve the body, a horrifying thought, but one consistent with the unusual condition of Justin's remains. Agents from the South Carolina Law Enforcement Division, known as SLED, joined the investigation. The case had quickly become one of the most high-profile crimes in the county's history. Sheriff's deputies, SLED agents, and forensic specialists spent days scouring the property inch by inch. They wanted answers. But for every clue they found, new mysteries seemed to emerge. The autopsy confirmed the unthinkable. Justin Turner had been strangled to death. There were also signs of sexual assault, though there was no evidence that he had been abused prior to that day. The medical examiner determined that Justin's stomach still contained food cereal from his breakfast that morning. This helped narrow his time of death to sometime between mid-morning and early afternoon on the day he vanished. That detail was crucial. It meant that Justin had likely been killed not long after he left his house, and that his body may have been hidden nearby for the entire duration of the search. If true, it raised another disturbing question. Had the killer been living in the same home while the community searched for the boy? At first, investigators turned their attention to those closest to Justin, his family. In most child homicides, statistics show that the perpetrator is often someone known to the victim. Victor Turner, the father, told investigators he had been at work the entire day Justin disappeared. Pamela, the stepmother, said she had been home taking a shower when Justin left for the bus stop. Neither reported seeing or hearing anything unusual. However, inconsistencies soon began to surface. Pamela initially told deputies that Justin had boarded the school bus that morning and gone to school. But when police confirmed that he had never arrived, her story changed. She said she had simply assumed he caught the bus but wasn't sure. That contradiction raised red flags. Both Victor and Pamela agreed to take polygraph tests in the days following the discovery. According to investigators, both failed. The results were never enough to serve as concrete evidence, but they were enough to deepen suspicion. Afterward, the couple stopped cooperating with law enforcement and hired an attorney. Their sudden silence only fueled speculation within the community. Lieutenant Sidney Wren, one of the lead investigators, later told reporters, "To my knowledge, there's no evidence to suggest anyone outside the home was involved." It was a statement that caught public attention and made many wonder if the answer had been inside the Turner household all along. As investigators re-interviewed neighbors and relatives, they uncovered fragments of information that painted a troubling picture. Some witnesses claimed that Pamela had argued with Justin the morning he disappeared. Others recalled seeing her acting strangely during the search, unusually calm, almost detached. Still, without physical evidence, detectives couldn't make an arrest. The case teetered between suspicion and uncertainty, and the pressure from the media only intensified. By mid-year, after months of investigation, the grand jury recommended issuing an arrest warrant for Pamela Turner, Justin's stepmother. She was charged with homicide. When officers arrived to take her into custody, Pamela reportedly showed no visible reaction. No tears, no resistance, just silence. But in the months that followed, the case against her began to fall apart. Evidence was largely circumstantial. There were no fingerprints, no eyewitnesses, and no definitive DNA linking her to the crime. When the case was handed to the solicitor's office for review, prosecutors concluded that there was insufficient evidence to proceed. Pamela Turner was released, and all charges were dropped. With Pamela cleared and no new suspects, the investigation began to stall. For years, detectives revisited leads that went nowhere. Victor and Pamela, who later changed her name to Megan, eventually left Berkeley County altogether. They stopped communicating with law enforcement and refused further interviews. Meanwhile, Justin's biological mother, Elaine Pace, refused to let the case fade away. She called news stations. She wrote letters. And she kept pushing for justice, even when it felt like no one was listening. Elaine once told a local reporter, "I just want them to find who did this to my baby. I can't rest until they do." Her determination kept the story alive. For the Pace family, Justin's death became a wound that never healed. They continued to celebrate his birthday each year, lighting a candle, sharing memories, and promising not to give up. Elaine's husband, Russell Pace, later recalled that day vividly. "She told me before she passed, 'Don't stop fighting. Keep it in the news. Don't let people forget what happened to Justin.'" Elaine would keep that promise until her death in 2004, 15 years after her son was killed. Even after her passing, her family carried her mission forward. By 2014, more than 25 years after Justin's murder, the case was officially listed among Berkeley County's unresolved homicides. But behind the scenes, a small group of detectives never stopped looking. In 2020, Sheriff Dwayne Lewis announced the creation of a dedicated cold case unit, a team designed to revisit unsolved crimes with the help of modern forensic technology. Among the cases at the top of their list was that of 5-year-old Justin Lee Turner. The sheriff described the case as deeply personal for the community and vowed to use every available tool to finally uncover the truth. Advances in DNA testing, fiber analysis, and digital record comparison gave investigators a new starting point. Samples that had sat in storage for decades were re-examined, and for the first time in years, there was hope. The murder of 5-year-old Justin Turner shattered not just a family, but a community that prided itself on trust and simplicity. The town of Cross, South Carolina, had always been the kind of place where everyone knew each other, where neighbors shared sugar, borrowed tools, and watched one another's children. But after March 1989, that trust was replaced by something else: whispers, rumors, and the chilling belief that the monster who killed Justin might not have come from the outside at all, but from within the Turner home itself. In the days following Justin's funeral, reporters began crowding around the Turner residence. The small, faded house on Black Oak Road, once just another family home, had become the most talked-about address in Berkeley County. Neighbors, still grieving, told reporters they didn't understand how something so horrific could happen there. "He was just a little boy," one woman said, her voice breaking. "Always smiling, always polite. I can't believe this happened right across the street." But behind the sympathy, suspicion was growing. People began recalling small, seemingly unimportant details, moments that didn't sit right in hindsight. One neighbor recalled seeing Victor Turner's car parked at home later than usual that morning. Another claimed Pamela had been oddly composed during the search, more frustrated by the media attention than distraught over the missing child. And then there was the matter of the camper. The family's old camper had been searched multiple times during the first 2 days of Justin's disappearance. Volunteers and deputies had looked inside, under, and around it, and yet no one found anything. That detail baffled investigators. When Justin's body was finally discovered inside the storage compartment, it raised an unsettling question. Had the boy's body been there the entire time and simply overlooked, or had someone deliberately placed it there after the initial search? The latter seemed more likely, and if that was true, it meant one terrifying thing: someone had access to the property and returned later to hide the evidence. Who could do that without being seen? Only someone who lived there. To understand what might have happened, investigators began piecing together what life was like inside the Turner home. Victor Turner, Justin's father, was described as quiet but controlling. He worked long hours and often left Pamela in charge of the children. Pamela, his second wife, was young, barely in her mid-20s at the time, and had a complicated relationship with Justin, her stepson. Relatives later described tension between them. Pamela reportedly struggled with disciplining Justin and often complained that he didn't listen to her. Justin, being only 5, was full of energy, playful, curious, and sometimes mischievous in a way only a child could be. But that behavior, according to some family members, sometimes got under Pamela's skin. One of Victor's relatives told investigators that Pamela had referred to Justin as spoiled and once said she couldn't deal with him anymore. It wasn't evidence, but it painted a troubling emotional backdrop. The morning Justin disappeared seemed ordinary at first glance. Victor left for work early. As usual, Pamela stayed behind with Justin and her own son. According to her first statement, Justin had been dressed and ready for school by 7:30. She said she watched him leave for the bus stop, then went back inside to shower. But as investigators retraced that timeline, inconsistencies appeared. Neighbors who typically saw Justin walking down the road that morning said they never did. And one neighbor, a man named Robert Simmons, told deputies he thought it was strange that Pamela's car wasn't in its usual spot, suggesting she might have gone out around that same time. When questioned again, Pamela couldn't recall exactly when she got into the shower or how long she stayed. Her uncertainty only deepened suspicion. Investigators soon realized that almost every timeline in the Turner household contradicted another. Pamela said Victor left for work by 6 a.m., but Victor's employer said he didn't clock in until after 7. Victor claimed he didn't return home until after the police were already searching for Justin, but a witness said they saw his car parked outside the house that afternoon. Were these simple memory lapses caused by stress, or deliberate attempts to distort the truth? Privately, detectives began to suspect that not all was well between Victor and Pamela. Interviews with friends suggested their marriage was strained, filled with arguments, particularly about money and childcare. One friend told investigators that Pamela had once said she didn't sign up to be a full-time babysitter. Another recalled that she seemed jealous of the attention Victor gave to his son from a previous relationship. These testimonies painted a picture of resentment, the kind that can slowly build over time. Meanwhile, Elaine Pace, Justin's biological mother, was growing increasingly vocal. She had shared custody and knew her son's routines intimately. Elaine publicly questioned the story told by Pamela and Victor, saying, "I know my baby. He would never wander off. Somebody took him, and whoever did it knows this family." Her grief gave the case a human face. Every time she appeared on television or in the local paper, it reminded people that this was not just another headline, it was a mother's worst nightmare. But Elaine's insistence that the truth was inside that house soon made her a target of criticism. Some accused her of trying to smear Victor out of bitterness from their breakup. Others, though, quietly agreed with her. By summer of 1989, the investigation had reached a stalemate. There was no DNA evidence tying anyone to the murder, at least not with the technology available at the time. Every theory came back to the same question: who had the motive and opportunity to harm Justin Turner? The only consistent answers pointed toward the people who lived under the same roof. Still, the sheriff's department couldn't make an arrest without physical proof. Pamela and Victor both lawyered up, and by the end of that year, the case had quietly faded from the headlines. Even after the case went cold, the people of Cross never stopped talking about it. In barbershops, grocery stores, and church gatherings, the topic resurfaced again and again. Many were convinced Pamela knew more than she'd admitted. Others believed Victor was protecting her, or worse, involved himself. But without new evidence, the truth remained buried. For more than 3 decades, the Turner home became a symbol of unanswered questions, a reminder of how some crimes don't fade with time. They simply go quiet. Years passed. Victor and Pamela divorced. Pamela remarried and changed her name to Megan. Life went on, at least on the surface. But for those who remembered Justin, the wound remained open. In 2004, when Justin's mother Elaine died, local reporters revisited the story. They asked Sheriff Ray Womack whether the case was still being investigated. His answer was cautious but promising. "Some cases take longer than others. We haven't forgotten Justin Turner." Behind the scenes, the sheriff's department had begun quietly revisiting the evidence. Old case files were being digitized. Physical samples were being preserved. And when the South Carolina Law Enforcement Division began offering advanced DNA analysis in the late 2010 seconds, the Turner case was flagged for re-examination. By 2020, the world had changed, and so had forensic science. Samples that once seemed too small or degraded could now be tested with precision unimaginable. In 1989, when Berkeley County's Cold Case Unit reopened Justin's file, they found several key pieces of preserved evidence: fiber samples from the camper, animal hairs found on Justin's hand, DNA traces from under his fingernails. The results would shock everyone. Laboratory reports identified DNA that matched an individual living in South Carolina, someone directly connected to the Turner family. In early 2023, 34 years after Justin Turner's death, authorities announced new developments. Though details were limited at first, officials confirmed that forensic evidence had led them to 2 arrests connected to the case. Both suspects were known to the family. Both had access to the home. And both had lived freely for more than 3 decades. For Elaine Pace's surviving family, the announcement was bittersweet. Justice had been delayed but not denied. For 34 years, the murder of 5-year-old Justin Turner haunted the people of Berkeley County, South Carolina. The case went cold. The suspects moved on. And for decades, the truth seemed destined to remain buried, hidden somewhere between rumor, memory, and silence. But in the spring of 2023, something extraordinary happened. A quiet re-examination of old evidence stored for decades in sealed boxes would do what human testimony could not. It would speak, and when it did, it pointed directly to the people who had always been closest to the victim. When Sheriff Dwayne Lewis launched Berkeley County's Cold Case Unit, he made a promise to the families of unsolved victims. "We may not bring your loved one back, but we will bring you answers." The team began with a simple mission: to revisit the county's most haunting unsolved cases using modern forensic technology. Among the first cases pulled from the archives was that of Justin Turner, murdered in March 1989. Inside a weathered cardboard box labeled Turner Case, Evidence AF, investigators found everything that had once been collected from the family's home and camper: dusty folders, old crime scene photos, and most importantly, preserved biological samples sealed in sterile envelopes. Back then, the tools to analyze DNA were primitive. Today, they could reveal more than anyone imagined. Among the samples sent for retesting were swabs from Justin's fingernails, collected during the autopsy, fiber traces from the camper's floor and bedding, hair fragments found clutched in Justin's small hand. Technicians at the South Carolina Law Enforcement Division, SLED Forensic Laboratory, used next-generation DNA sequencing to extract usable profiles from the degraded materials. The process was delicate. Any contamination could compromise the results. Each sample was cleaned, replicated, and analyzed multiple times to ensure accuracy. After months of work, the lab returned its findings. They had a match. The DNA found under Justin's fingernails belonged to Pamela Turner, his stepmother. It was the kind of evidence investigators had dreamed of for decades, proof that Justin had fought back. The scratches on his hands weren't random injuries. They were defensive wounds. It meant that during his final moments, Justin had tried to resist his attacker and, in doing so, left behind the clue that would one day expose them. When this information reached Sheriff Lewis's team, the room reportedly went silent. After 34 years, the first undeniable link had been established. But that wasn't all. A second DNA profile found on fibers inside the camper did not match Pamela. Instead, it matched another individual closely related to Victor Turner. That revelation changed everything. Investigators had long suspected that multiple people may have been involved, someone to commit the crime, another to conceal it. Now, the science supported that theory. The evidence suggested that Justin's body had been moved after death, possibly by more than one person, and that both DNA contributors had lived in or near the Turner home at the time. For detectives who had followed this case for years, it was both vindication and heartbreak. Vindication because their early suspicions were correct. Heartbreak because it confirmed that the answers had always been inside the Turner family. In March 2023, exactly 34 years after the murder, authorities made their move. Pamela Turner, now living under the name Megan Fleming, was arrested at her home in South Carolina. A second relative, whose name authorities initially withheld pending further investigation, was also taken into custody for evidence tampering and obstruction. Pamela was charged with first-degree murder and sexual assault. When officers arrived, she reportedly appeared calm, eerily calm, much like she had decades earlier during the search for Justin. Neighbors described her as polite and quiet, someone who kept to herself. No one suspected that she had been hiding one of the state's darkest secrets. On March 7, 2023, Sheriff Dwayne Lewis stood before cameras and reporters in a somber press conference. Behind him, a large photograph of Justin Turner smiling, innocent, and forever 5 years old. Today, after 34 years, we can finally say that we are one step closer to justice for Justin, the sheriff said. This case never left our hearts, and we thank the persistence of our cold case unit, the forensic experts at SLED, and the community that never stopped caring. As reporters pressed for details, the sheriff declined to reveal everything, citing the ongoing nature of the prosecution. But one line stood out: DNA doesn't lie. Time doesn't erase truth. It was the moment the entire county had been waiting for. So how did the new DNA analysis succeed where the 1,989 investigation had failed? The answer lies in modern genetic sequencing. In 1989, DNA testing was still in its infancy. Samples required large quantities of material and were often degraded by time or mishandling. By 2023, however, forensic scientists could extract viable DNA from a single cell. Advanced amplification techniques allowed them to multiply tiny fragments and reconstruct full genetic profiles from samples too small to be analyzed before. Even after 3 decades, the biological materials preserved in the Turner case were intact enough to yield results. It was, quite literally, a miracle of science and an act of justice long overdue. When news of the arrests broke, Berkeley County was stunned. Some residents felt relief. Others struggled to accept that the stepmother who had once cried for the cameras was now accused of the crime. Local churches held vigils in Justin's memory. Old neighbors came forward to speak to reporters, many saying they had always believed Pamela knew more than she admitted. One woman told local news, "We always felt something was off, but you don't want to believe a mother figure could do that." Now, they knew the truth. For the Pace family, Justin's biological relatives, the news reopened old wounds. Elaine's husband, Russell, who had continued her fight after her death, told the press, "Elaine prayed for this day. She said justice would come, even if it took the rest of our lives. I wish she were here to see it." The family visited Justin's grave later that week, placing flowers and a note that read, "You were never forgotten, little man. Justice finally found you." When Pamela Turner appeared in court for her first hearing, she wore a pale blue prison jumpsuit and showed little emotion. Reporters noted her calm demeanor, the same unsettling composure that had drawn suspicion decades earlier. The prosecution outlined the evidence: DNA under Justin's nails, fibers from the camper, and witness statements that placed her alone with the boy that morning. Pamela's defense team argued that the evidence was circumstantial and that decades of degradation could have caused contamination. But investigators were confident. They had not relied on memory or testimony this time. They had relied on science, precise, impartial, and unflinching. Behind every successful cold case investigation lies years of persistence, and this case was no different. Detective Sarah Whitfield, who joined the cold case unit in 2019, said in an interview, "We didn't have to reinvent the investigation. We just had to listen to the evidence, to the people who never gave up, and to the silence that held the truth." She described the moment the lab results came in as overwhelming. "I remember thinking, this is it. This little boy finally gets his voice back." Justin Turner's murder and its eventual resolution revealed more than just a story of tragedy. It highlighted the evolution of justice itself. It showed how technology can bridge the gap between then and now, turning forgotten evidence into living testimony. It proved that even when human memory fades, science remembers. And perhaps most importantly, it reminded investigators everywhere that no case is ever truly cold, only waiting. As of late 2023, Pamela Turner remained in custody awaiting trial. The investigation into the second suspect was ongoing, with prosecutors hinting at additional charges related to evidence tampering and conspiracy. For Berkeley County, the arrest brought closure, but also reflection. It forced the community to confront a painful truth. Sometimes, evil doesn't come from strangers. Sometimes, it hides behind a familiar smile, a motherly voice, a gentle touch. And sometimes, it takes decades and a few strands of DNA to see it clearly. Justice isn't always swift. But when it comes even after 34 long years, it carries a weight that silence can no longer hold. The story of Justin Turner is not just about tragedy. It's about persistence, science, and the unshakable human need for truth. As investigators pack away the final files and close this chapter, one thing remains certain: DNA doesn't lie, and neither does time, when justice is patient enough to wait. It had been 38 years. 38 years since a bright morning turned dark in Berkeley County, South Carolina. For Justin's family, time never dulled the pain, but it sharpened their questions. And then, in April 2024, something happened that no one expected. At the front of the room, a podium stands before a wall of microphones. Behind it, uniformed officers, investigators, and state officials. The banner reads, "Berkeley County Sheriff's Office." The sheriff steps up to the microphone. He takes a slow breath, the weight of years visible in his expression. Good afternoon. Thank you all for being here today. After decades of investigative work, we are here to announce a major development in the case of Justin Turner. A pause. The room falls silent. Earlier this week, investigators with the Berkeley County Sheriff's Office, working alongside SLED and the Attorney General's Office, arrested 6 5-year-old Victor Turner and 6 3-year-old Elaine Faye Turner in connection with the 1,989 murder of their son, Justin Turner. The room erupts. Reporters rush to record every word, every detail of what, for years, seemed like an impossible turn of events. These arrests come after an exhaustive review of evidence, including modern forensic testing and re-interviews with witnesses. We believe we now have the information necessary to hold the responsible parties accountable. Behind him, a digital screen flashes with the mugshots of Victor and Elaine Turner, older now, gray hair, lined faces. The images contrast sharply with their smiling family photos from the 1,980 seconds. For the first time in nearly 4 decades, Justin Turner's name was being spoken not as a cold case, but as an active murder investigation. Reporters ask questions. What led to the arrest? Was there new DNA evidence? Did a witness finally come forward? But the sheriff was careful with his words. This remains an ongoing investigation. Additional details will be released at the appropriate time. What I can say is that justice, though delayed, is now in motion. Outside the courthouse, news vans lined the street. Locals gathered, some in disbelief, others whispering prayers. And not far away, Justin's mother stood surrounded by family and supporters. After years of waiting, she finally faced the moment she had dreamed of and feared at the same time. Reporter: "Ma'am, can you tell us what this moment means to you?" She takes a deep breath, her voice trembling but steady. Justin's mother: "For years, people told me to move on, but I couldn't. My boy didn't just disappear. Somebody took him from us, and I promised him I would never stop fighting until we found the truth." Her eyes glisten with tears, but her tone remains firm, the voice of a mother who's carried grief and hope side by side for decades. "Today, I feel like my baby can finally rest." For the investigators, the case was a testament to persistence and to the power of cold case work. Advancements in forensic science had opened doors that were once sealed shut. Behind the scenes, a small cold case team had spent years digitizing evidence, tracking down retired officers, and requesting lab reanalysis on old samples once thought unusable. When you reopen a case like this, you're not just dealing with files, you're dealing with lives that have been on hold for decades. You can't stop until the truth comes out. But justice, even after all these years, rarely comes without pain. Neighbors who remembered the Turner family described them as quiet, ordinary, church-going people. No one could reconcile the warm family photos with the idea of 2 parents charged with murdering their own child. Neighbor: "It's just heartbreaking. I used to see Justin riding his bike. He was such a happy little boy." In the weeks following the arrests, the community was torn between relief and disbelief. Some wondered why it had taken so long. Others simply wanted answers. The sheriff's office released one final statement that week, confirming that the case would be prosecuted by the South Carolina Attorney General's office and that additional evidence was being reviewed. Statement read by spokesperson: "This investigation demonstrates our commitment to justice. No matter how much time has passed, Justin Turner's story will not be forgotten." As the cameras turned off and the crowd dispersed, the courthouse steps fell quiet again. The sound of shutters faded into the distance. But for those who had waited nearly 4 decades, that silence meant something new. It meant movement. Justice, they say, has no expiration date. For nearly 4 decades, the name Justin Turner had echoed in silence, carried through memories, unanswered questions, and the unshakable persistence of a grieving mother. But in 2024, that silence was finally broken. The arrest of Victor and Elaine Turner was not just another headline. It was the reopening of a wound that had never healed. Visual cue. Courtroom exterior. Reporters gathered. People walking into court. The courthouse in Berkeley County, South Carolina, had seen many trials over the years, but few as emotionally charged as this one. Inside, as the hearing began, the air was heavy. Detectives, journalists, and locals filled the benches. And in the front row sat Justin's mother, holding a photo of her son, his bright smile forever frozen in time. Both Victor and Elaine Turner stood before the judge, older now, frail, but facing accusations that would redefine their legacy forever. They were charged with murder, obstruction of justice, and conspiracy in connection with Justin's death. When asked to enter their pleas, both responded the same way. Not guilty. The words echoed through the room. Prosecutors outlined a case built on modern forensic reanalysis, reconstructed timelines, and re-examined witness statements. While not every detail was made public, investigators hinted that previously overlooked evidence and new lab technology had revealed inconsistencies in the original reports. In court, the lead prosecutor stood before the jury, speaking with careful precision. This case represents years of silence, years of unanswered questions, and the enduring power of a mother's fight for truth. What happened to Justin Turner is not just a tragedy, it is a betrayal. And today, we begin the process of accountability. Defense attorneys argued that the evidence was circumstantial, that memories fade, and that decades-old materials could not be trusted. But for the jury, the emotional weight of the case was undeniable. Throughout the proceedings, Justin's family remained steadfast. They attended every hearing, every update, every announcement, even when the defense tried to paint a different picture. At one point, Justin's mother was called to testify. The courtroom fell silent as she took the stand. Her voice was steady, but years of emotion trembled beneath every word. I remember the day he disappeared. I remember calling his name, searching the woods, and praying he would come home. For years, people told me to stop hoping, but I couldn't. I knew one day, the truth would come out. Her testimony moved even the most stoic faces in the room. Outside the courthouse, the community followed the trial closely. For many residents, Justin's story had haunted Berkeley County for generations, a reminder that even the most peaceful neighborhoods can hold the darkest secrets. Old neighbors were interviewed by local news outlets, expressing disbelief that the case had finally reached this stage. I didn't think I'd live to see this day. It's been so long, but I'm glad Justin is finally getting justice. Another local added, his mother never gave up. That woman fought harder than anyone I've ever seen. She's the reason this case is back here today. L. The case also sparked renewed attention on cold case forensics. Experts explained how DNA technology, digital record reconstruction, and data sharing between agencies are transforming how long-forgotten cases are solved. After weeks of testimony, the jury returned to the courtroom. The tension was palpable. Reporters' pens hovered. Family members held their breath. The foreperson stood, holding the verdict sheet. Has the jury reached a unanimous verdict? Yes, Your Honor, we have. The moment seemed to last forever. In the case of the state of South Carolina versus Victor Turner and Elaine Turner, we find the defendants guilty. A collective gasp filled the room. Tears flowed freely from investigators, family, and even strangers who had followed the story for years. Justin's mother buried her face in her hands, overcome with emotion. Beside her, a family member whispered, "It's over." He finally got justice. Victor and Elaine Turner were each sentenced to life in prison. The courtroom emptied slowly that day, with a sense of relief, sorrow, and closure intertwining in equal measure. Outside, reporters captured the final statements. The Berkeley County Sheriff addressed the cameras once more. This case reminds us that no matter how much time passes, truth has a way of surfacing. We thank every investigator, every scientist, and every citizen who kept hope alive for Justin Turner. For Justin's mother, the verdict was both an ending and a beginning. An end to decades of uncertainty and the beginning of healing. She later established a small foundation in her son's name dedicated to supporting families of missing children and promoting awareness for unsolved cases. If my story can give one mother the strength to keep fighting, then Justin's memory lives on. Justin Turner's case is a reminder that justice doesn't always come quickly, but it can still come. Through perseverance, technology, and the unwavering love of a mother, the truth was finally brought to light. Because sometimes, justice doesn't fade with time. It only waits patiently for someone who refuses to stop asking why. Thank you for watching this episode of Beyond the Case. If this story moved you, please share it to keep Justin's memory alive. Don't forget to like this video, subscribe, and turn on notifications because here, every story deserves a voice.